Are we spending the right amount of money for the best education in Michigan? Plus, the value of an endorsement. It's a crowded race to replace Congressman John Conyers. And MSU's crisis brings debate over how we govern our universities. Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson join me at the table, and MiWeek is coming up.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Fighting through the snow, cold, and the flu this week, we find ourselves still knee-deep in crisis at Michigan State. Coming up, we'll get into calls of no confidence, Engler's terse words for investigators, and the debate over how we govern our universities. And it's been described as a field that's crowded but wide open, running for former Congressman John Conyers' seat, and how big a deal one endorsement this week might be. But we're starting this week with how much money we're spending on Michigan's schools. Is it enough? And are we spending it on the right things? Governor Snyder gave his last budget proposal this week. He wants to up K-12 spending to its highest levels in 15 years, raising the foundation allowance by $312 million. Public universities get only a 2% bump, and Snyder wants to fund his Marshall Plan idea he launched at the State of the State, connecting students to in-demand careers. But we still don't have a full account of that program. Now, we're not going to dissect each part of the budget because Nolan would protest and then promptly fall asleep, but how Lansing wants to spend our money is a big deal. And if you look at the abysmal test scores and reading levels that we've racked up in recent years compared to the rest of the country, you'll want to know not only how much money we're throwing at the problem, but are the resources in the right place to make a difference. Let's bring in Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of WDET. Now, weren't you excited when I said budget?
Oh, yeah, I am. I think it's always, everyone waits for this week every year to see, all right,
how are we spending
what are the
our
things
money?
that we're going to do? What's going to be different? Are we going to have some great big
nobody
new program?
does that.
I do.
You know what? I think everyone does. Don't you want to see exactly what we're spending our money on? And especially when it comes to education, that's
He's
what I
already
really
bored.
wanted
We
to
haven't
focus
even
on.
started talking
No,
yet.
you can't be bored yet.
I'm not.
Nolan.
I'm not. You know, there's some interesting things in this budget, particularly when it comes to education. And we've been dealing with the funding gap since Prop 8 was passed, where holdover districts, high tax districts got a bigger grant from the state than poorer districts did, and it just exacerbated the inequalities between the rich and poor districts. This budget goes a long way to closing that gap. The poorer districts get $240 more per pupil. This is a huge increase in the budget for the per pupil grant, which is unrestricted.
And you have to think that educators are pleased about this. Again, this is back up for the highest it's been in 15 years. Well, but they have to give a little bit and say, look, at least some of the funding is coming back up again. Right. But is it going to make the difference that we need?
I mean, it depends on how they use it, right?
That's it.
And I've said for a long time that we have a funding problem with schools in education in Michigan, and that's true. We have fallen way behind other states in the way that we, not just the amount of money we give, but how we give it. And this budget does, I think, go a long way to trying to even out the gap between rich and poor. But I've also said that it's not just money, right? We have all these other systemic issues in the way we govern schools, in the way that we decide what they're going to do in classrooms, that it's also out of sync with other states. And so, you know, maybe if you marry them up together, if you get more money and be more meticulous about how we manage schools, we can actually start climbing back up the ladder.
Well, you would get some
down.
complaints from people saying, if we want to do innovative things, or we need more teachers in the classroom, or if we need more support staff, that is going to take funding. So in essence, it always comes back down to funding. And so where is this innovative new funding going to come from, or should we be kind of blowing up the system? Because we talk about how we fund our schools. We've talked about this for a number of years now, and it's always well, we need X amount, and a dollar amount was put on during a study that the state commissioned a couple years ago, and then piggybacked on then the governor's 21st Century Education Commission report.
So all in, we spend ninth most in the nation per pupil on education. We ought to be able to do a lot better than 45th, 46th, 47th in the nation on student performance. And so I believe there is some correlation between money and school performance, but obviously it's not as direct as the folks who did this adequacy story would have us believe. We have an education system in this state, a structure that discourages innovation. It's too rigid. There's been too many hands in it. The legislature has set standards for education. The governor has, the Board of Education. We need a more directly accountable structure in this state for running the schools. You can't have both an elected governor and an elected school board equal in running education, and the legislature on the side deciding every pet peeve it has about what goes in the classroom. They encode it in law. You don't have a system that allows teachers to do their best within the classrooms.
Okay, so we've had this debate now for about a year, talking about should we be changing the governance structure of how we deal with education, and yet we've seen nothing happen.
That's right.
I was gonna say, are we actually having that debate though?
No,
who's
we've
having
had
that
this
debate?
debate
Oh, you
here
mean
on
here
the
at the table.
Nobody's
table. We've
listening
had
to
that
I was
debate.
going to say, I don't feel like anyone in
Absolutely.
Lansing is actually
Well,
talking about that.
There's a bill that's been introduced now. It'll go nowhere.
There's a task force, I think, that's still waiting out there
But
somewhere.
it's the right thing to do. You need to fold the Board of Education, the Education Department, into state government and hold the governor accountable. Because right now you can have a governor saying, "I'm the education governor," and then
do we have a governor saying that right now, though?
No, but I said you could have, and you get to the end. They say, "Well, the state board, they did this and they did that." There's no direct accountability.
Okay, so I was doing some digging on school finance. Very exciting. And I came across the School Finance Research Collaborative. So for the last year, they were funded by Kellogg and Skillman and Mott. For the last year, they've been taking a look at how we do fund our schools in the state of Michigan, and they just came out with a big report in January, taking a look at some of the numbers, and they said that the base per pupil cost that we should be looking at is actually $9,590 per student, and that is a lot more than already what the base.
Or that's 2,000 more.
2,000
than what
more.
we're dealing
Well,
with
when
now,
you fold in all the money, we're spending about $12,000 on average across the state. But again,
And that's a base student. We're
that's
not
a-
taking into account even special ed
And you can-
or kids
and
that
you
have
can't use that
extreme
12
impairment.
because that's actually, the difference between the 7 and the 12 is things that we probably shouldn't be spending money in the way that we spend them on,
probably true.
but you can't count that as like classroom spending. It's not.
but
So
we've got a system here that no matter how much money we raise and spend, our unmet obligations, our long-term pension and healthcare obligations gobbles up the biggest chunk of any increase in spending. It's been a losing battle for a decade or more, where we increase education spending and 2/3 of it goes to meet the pension shortfall, which we've never dealt with. But I think the basic problem, I come to the conclusion, basic problem in Michigan is we just don't give a damn about education here. Your child organization released a poll this week that showed only 35% of parents felt passionately about the performance of the schools,
their schools,
in this
yeah.
state. I mean, as
35%, because
yeah.
I'm sitting here as a parent and I'm saying I feel very
That's you.
passionately about
That's you, but that
what
ain't all.
direction our schools
That ain't
are
all
heading
your
into.
neighbors, because when you've got 2/3 of the state parents apathetic about the performance of schools, nothing's going to make it better. No proposal, no reform, no amount of money is going to make it. The parents have to want this, and we've never in Michigan wanted a good education system more than we've wanted some other things.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this too. Something else in the budget that jumped at me looking at education. You only have a 2% bump for public universities, and when we look back at the decisions that Amazon made about not even putting Detroit in the top 20, and looking at when we say education, part of that too is the number of higher ed degrees that we have here in the state of Michigan, and that might be also correlating with making college a little bit more affordable for kids to be able to get to and to go to and to graduate. But yet, so while there is the infusion of money there through K-12, and again, it's a good level, it's still lagging behind at the university level.
We are so far behind on higher ed funding when you compare, again, to other states that are getting better outcomes. That 2% barely keeps us where we are. It helps keeps us falling behind. We've got to really think about, and Nolan's point about this passion that you need among parents, among citizens, to say higher ed and K-12 are, golden priorities that we're willing to really invest in. You're not going to get, if you can't get that going, you're not going to start moving back up the ladder. We're moving down. We're not moving up. But again,
you have to have accountability. These universities have been completely aloof from fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility. It's actually
not true.
It is true, Steve. It is true. They have surpassed inflation by 2 and 3, 4 times every year for the last 20 years.
But they also are making sure that the money that they're spending goes to actual achievement and research and things like that. It's not like they're just sitting around throwing money away.
They certainly, in a lot of cases, they are.
It's expensive to run a top-notch university.
There's a lot of brick and mortar obsession on these campuses.
But we're not paying for that, really. That's all fun donors.
Taking money that could have gone to maybe a scholarship endowments, and you all are your former papers. Freeport's had a good series this week about that U of M not using that endowment for.
But that's not what endowments are for.
To relieve student
look,
tuition.
I'm gonna push back on something that you guys mentioned just a minute ago about the fact that parents aren't being forceful enough, or that parents don't care enough, and that until we stand up and say we want some kind of change, but maybe parents haven't felt like they can be totally listened to, or anything that they say is going to make any kind of difference in how their schools are governed at the local level.
That might be some of it. I also think that there is a cultural imperative that's taken hold that says to people, more money, more tax money, more money that you have to pay into government somehow doesn't translate into better results. Now, some of that is about us having not held people accountable for results. I mean, I think we've done things in the past that have let money go to education and haven't resulted in the gains that we wanted. But I also think that there's a very cynical political narrative that gets pushed by one side of the political spectrum that says government can't do anything right. Government can't perform, so don't give them your money. Keep your money, and you decide how to spend it, and things will be okay. And the truth is,
can you blame how people feel about government these days?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
look what just happened in Washington, for God's sakes.
You can point to any number of reasons that government doesn't perform the way it should. But what's the answer to that? Is the answer to that to starve it of money so that it can't perform? Or is it to fund it properly so that it does perform?
But how do you know whether you're funding properly or not when nobody ever stops to see how the money is being spent?
And they should be doing that.
And setting priorities.
Well, and I also think it's the testing too, and the results of the testing, and that's the only marker that we can really see is what we're doing working. Right. And when you keep changing the test and you don't have any kind of consistency over a 5-year period or a 3-year period, then you keep changing how teachers are teaching, because some of them are teaching to the test because they know if they don't get the numbers that they're supposed to be, that they are in trouble.
But there's other ways to teach. We're test obsessed, and there's other ways to teach and other ways to measure.
It goes back to your innovation point.
But we have tied our own hands with all of these legislation governing what goes on in the classroom. We've tied our own hands when it comes to innovation.
I think it's going to be interesting when we look at the governor's race now in this next year, where education is going to be on the priority list for each of the candidates, and if that will be a large sticking point for people
I will make
who are
a prediction
voting.
That neither one of these candidates will talk about the radical kinds of rethinking of education that we need to become like Florida or Tennessee or Massachusetts or any of the.
We need to blow it up.
Right. I mean, we do it wrong.
Maybe that comes back. Maybe that comes back then to the constituency. That comes back to the parents. That comes back to people here and says, yes, we demand some kind of.
I mean, look at the money we could save just employing better technology, both at the university level and at the K-12 level. Universities balk at using more internet classrooms and what have you. There's a traditionalist attitude that keeps us from innovating and saving money.
I'm not sure
I don't know.
My
My third grade is still dragging on an iPad.
The culture is sometimes.
All right, well, turning now to Michigan State, it is the first week on the job for interim President John Engler dealing with the Nassar scandal aftermath. A vote of no confidence from the faculty is probably on the way to the Board of Trustees very soon. Plus, Engler is already tangled with investigators and told Attorney General Bill Schuette he's no longer endorsing him for governor. Add to this the debate around how university trustees should be chosen and a push for a constitutional amendment to make them appointed by the governor. We still have a lot to sort through with Michigan State. And Stephen, you just rolled your eyes and gave a
it just gets worse every
what?
day. It just gets worse every day. I just feel like every decision that gets made or every statement that gets made, you're like, what are they thinking? Why is this happening at a prestigious R1 university that represents represents our state?
Let's go ahead first off and talk about John Engler this week and angry at investigators for what he contended was like a televised opportunity. Showboating, dog and pony show, whatever you want to call it. Do you think he was justified in that?
Of course he is. And what he recognizes the reality here that for a long time, none of these investigators, Bill Schuette included, couldn't find Michigan State University, wasn't interested in finding out what went wrong there. We didn't want to touch it. Then those girls stood up in court and testified and captured the nation's hearts and attention. And then they're all rushing in now with their cameras.
As they should be rushing in.
They should have been rushing in last fall when there were a lot of people screaming, what are you waiting for? And what Engler recognizes is there's a lot of opportunism here, and a lot of people are going to try to feather their own political ambitions by showing up at Michigan State demanding records.
And who are you referring to? Who are you referring to in that there, Nolan?
He called out Bill Schuette, and I think that's a fair call. I mean, what John Engler is not going to tolerate is somebody making hay here.
Could the Attorney General say, hey, this is a case that has not had transparency for a very long time, and I'm just trying to make it as transparent as possible.
Difference between transparency and grandstanding, and I think that's where John Engler wants to draw the line. He told everybody at MSU, when you're asked a question, be honest. Don't destroy any records, give the investigators what they want. But he wants an orderly process here. He doesn't want 20 opportunists here from the NCAA, from Congress, from the State House, from any number of other places, falling all over each other to be the ones that say, hey, I got it,
Right move on Engler's part to say, yeah, by the way, I'm not going to endorse anybody in the governor's race, and pulling his endorsement from Bill Schuette.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's got to stay out of that if he's going to be in this role, and I think that goes a long way toward rehabilitating the very idea of him in that role, which I think still needs a lot of rehab and still needs a lot of discussion. But that was a grown-up thing to do, to say, I got to withdraw from this sort of political sphere that I'm used to dealing in. Whether that will be enough for the faculty at the university, I think remains to be seen, and I think they still have real legitimate questions about the process that was used here, about this board and what their priorities are.
But he's got a couple of big jobs to do here that he's very well suited for. Perhaps the biggest job, he's got to keep that donor base intact, and you saw a 25% drop off last fall in donors as this scandal started unfolding. That's a university president's main job, is raising money.
I would argue that it's not the main job,
and that's
part of the problem.
Spend the bulk of their time doing at these universities. He's got to keep that donor base intact, and he's very well suited for that. But he's also got to manage through this lawsuit crisis and make sure the university doesn't destroy its credibility any further by attacking these girls. He's got some hard decisions to make about whether you fight these lawsuits or go into mediation.
Right.
I'd say you have to go into mediation.
Gosh.
If
they start to fight these lawsuits, their image is destroyed.
You've got to stop this effort to use statute of limitations to cut a lot of these girls off of the
He's still the wrong person.
Let me ask you this. Let's talk about the Board of Trustees a little bit. And I thought that we'd maybe see some change from last week to this week, but they're all still intact. But what about this move to have some kind of constitutional amendment that would change the way that we choose them? That
we need to do that.
Gubernatorial, governor appointed.
You need to do that. Every other university, we got 15 universities, 12 of them the governor appoints, and they seem to be doing a very good job.
Right.
You've got three of them. Depends on which one you're talking about. You've got Western, Grand Valley. I mean, you've got three of them where it's a political job and where they're beholden by special interests, two special interests.
But see, what's the difference between being elected into a political job and being appointed by a politically elected person. I don't know that that gives you that distance.
Because today, if that MSU board had been appointed,
he
Snyder
could
remove every single one of them.
Well, that's true. You would have that level of accountability, but that doesn't stop. It seems to me that still imbues academia with this political stain. There may be better ways to think about.
Except those people owe their jobs to one person rather than 8 people owing their jobs to a lot of different people.
But it's still a politician. There are many different ways.
It's not a mega donor. It's not a union.
So one of the problems
it's not the faculty.
One of the problems with this discussion, and this is a great big Michigan problem, right? Is we've set up a binary choice. It's either that they have to be elected or that they have to be appointed by the governor. And that's totally ignorant of the diversity of manners in which these boards are constituted across the country. There are lots of different ways that states approach this that are neither gubernatorial appointment nor election. And no one's talking about saying, hey, let's look at best practice. Let's look around and see what everyone else does and see who has success.
So you're saying that this is more of a knee-jerk reaction?
It's a total knee-jerk reaction.
Well, it's not
and it's
going
the
to
way
happen
we deal
anyway.
with everything.
You're not going to get you're not going to get a 2/3 vote in the legislature to change the Constitution, and nobody's going to come up with the $8 to $10 million it'll take to do a ballot initiative. So this is what we're stuck with, and it's not the ideal situation, but it's what we got.
And I think we're going to have to see what happens with
the
Board of Trustees. If there's going to be some more heat put on them, if there's going to be some more heat put on, I am talking. We're going to have to see if there's going to be some more heat put on them, or if we see any resignations if the faculty does come out with a vote of no confidence. And hey, as things continue to turn around here, you never know what can happen.
Well, that's right. You don't know.
You absolutely don't know. All right, we're going to move on to the last thing here tonight. The race to replace Congressman John Conyers is getting pretty crowded. From his son to his nephew to a former state rep and Detroit City Council president, there are probably more people to come. Interestingly enough, Mayor Mike Duggan gave his endorsement this week to Council President Brenda Jones. How key is this endorsement in a crowded yet wide open race? I was surprised by the endorsement this week because it feels like it's earlier on in the race and that Mike Duggan came out and said, well, Brenda Jones is it.
I'm good, right?
I'm good. We're good with this.
He's had a very interesting relationship with Brenda Jones. And, what's he got to lose here? He endorses her and she wins. She goes to Congress. And, he's got a friend in Congress. He endorses her. She doesn't win. She owes him as council president. I don't see a downside to this. But, I mean, you've already got 7, 8 people in with more to come in a crowded race. Every little thing makes a difference. If the mayor can bring her an extra 3, 4, 5% of the vote, you've got 7, 8, 9 other well-known names in there. That could make a difference.
So an endorsement from him holds a lot of power. So endorsements are still key.
I think so. Yeah, no, I think it does. I mean, he just won his re-election in the city by 40 points or something ridiculous. I mean, people like him. They respect him. He's very popular statewide. It's so popular that people have talked about him as the best possible Democratic
don't say it. He is not running for governor.
He says he's not now. I mean, it's probably too late. But I mean, I still think he would have been a better choice than anyone we have on the Democratic side right now. What's interesting in this race, I think, is not just the number of people who are throwing their hat in, but the number of people who, at least on paper, are quite qualified for the job. I mean, it's not like we have a bunch of people who just have no experience with any of this stuff. I mean, Brenda Jones has been the council president now for 4 years. She's been on the council for a while. Rashida Tlaib
just got in this week. Ian Conyers, who's John Conyers' nephew, was in the state senate. These are people who
Coleman Young coming in.
Coleman Young, he's been a state
here's
senator.
what I would watch in this race. You've got a whole lot of big Detroit names in this race. And so far, that district is 35% suburban.
It is.
You've got Bill Wild now formed an exploratory committee. The only suburban candidate at the moment, Dave Gniezik may get in, but the only suburban candidate and a very well-known one. This is a district where the suburban communities don't feel they've had much representation over the years and don't feel like they've had any attention paid to their concerns. A good, solid suburban candidate in a crowded field of Detroiters, he could pick up 25, 26% of the vote he'll win.
Yeah.
That's gonna be
And also
interesting to
because
watch.
it's all on one side of the political.
That's right.
Especially it's
Right.
all Democrats,
It's
so
all
they've all got to
Democrats.
run against each other.
Yeah, and split the vote. All right, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank
That's going
you.
to do it for My Week. Thanks so much for joining me. Check us out at myweek.org. Plus, we're on Facebook and Twitter during the week. You can find Nolan in the Detroit News and Stephen on WDET. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next Thursday for My Week. Take care. That's
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.